like previously mentioned, unfortunately, due to some personal circumstances and some very serious illness, Mizeb can't make today's session, so it's audio only, as you might have read. I'm just reiterating this for the recording and in case somebody skipped that. But we're only going to be running for an hour. We'll do about 25 minutes, take a quick break for a cup of tea, a breather, digest some information, and then after the break, we can do questions, any specific asks that you might have and wonder how to do and edit, and I can show you that directly on the piece of software of your choosing, because as you might remember from last week, I told you guys about 3 software options that exist and can be used in audio editing. So one is Audacity, which is free. It's you can download it from their website, which is just, I think, audacity.com, and does a considerable amount of somebody's joining a bit late. There we go. So Audacity does a considerable amount of functions for basically nothing. After that, we'll talk about a bit about Reaper Media, which is a more sort of affordable one-time purchase license for personal use. It has a lot of effects, plugins. It's a bit more sort of streamlined, and then the standard for podcast, interview editing, any sort of voice work is Adobe Audition, and then Ableton Live for music production, which I'm not going to necessarily dive into. That's more of a, if you're interested in MIDI controllers and having digital instruments or any sort of virtual plugins, that's a bit more in depth, which if there is an interest in that, you can write Anna or the workshop team at DST, and we can see if we can gather information on that. But for now, we'll focus more on the how to edit simple instrumentals that are recorded via microphones, so anything to do with recording microphones. But with that out of the way, we'll start with, I'll share my screen right now and open up Audacity. I will fill the silence by talking about the weather, as I previously said. It's kind of cold now, which is upsetting. So you should now be seeing my screen. Does that work? Yep. Okay. Let me just I'm gonna stop this and bring up my extra utensils on my other monitor, just because there's a lot of other files that we can look into. Right, so this is the main sort of interface that Audacity presents with when you download it, and it looks maybe a bit old in terms of the menus, but it's very functional. So you see all the normal buttons that you have on a recorder or any sort of tape player, which are pause, play, stop, fast forward, and the big red button, which is record. Now, I generally recommend that any sort of audio recording that you want to do via laptop, via your microphone, like inbuilt one, or if you have any connected ones, headphones and so on, you do through something like Audacity instead of going straight to voice notes. Voice notes can work, but the reason why you want to use a dedicated software is because you can choose your inputs and outputs, so where you will hear the audio from if you want playback, or which mic exactly will record. Now, here you can see that we have, for now, it's choosing my internal microphone, which is the one in my laptop, instead of this one right here. And it's also wanting to play out through my internal microphone, which is most likely the default for most systems. Now, if I click here, I have my interface, which is called a Focusrite USB interface, and I'm just going to select that. You usually will see something like USB microphone, or depending on branding, you might see some brand name there. So I'm going to choose that for my input, and I'm going to also choose that for my speakers. So what is going to come out? Now, once you choose this, as I was talking about last week, you need to think about volume and gain on the microphone. But the best way to test that is just try a sample recording. So if I hit this red button, what's going to happen is Audacity is going to create an audio track, which you're going to see appear in this big gray space, and it's going to start recording to it. So let's do that right now. And you can already see my waveforms appearing in the track, and you can also see my levels up here on the top right. Now I'm hitting about -18 to -12 decibels, which is roughly where I recommend pre-recording to sit. I'm going to stop the recording now, just because we don't need it to go any longer. And around the -12 decibel point is good for mixing and mastering, just because you're not too loud that if you put the your volume at, say, about 50%. So one thing that I urge when you're editing is use headphones, or if you have speakers, maybe use an external speaker like a Bluetooth one, or connected separate ones instead of the laptop one, because with the laptop speaker, sound gets distorted somewhat within the case of the laptop. So you might hear things differently. A lot of the bass gets cut off, for example, in laptop speakers. So you want to avoid getting that difference between what you're hearing when you're editing and what people will hear when they play back the audio. So around -12 is the point where, with an average 50% volume on most interfaces and devices, you will hear something that is comfortable to, I would consider, the human ear. Some people prefer to go to -6, some people go to -18, but I'll say between -18 and -6 is roughly the range where you want to be sitting. Now, we've created this audio track. This is something we've recorded, and you can play it back. So you can track, and you can also see my levels up here on the top right. You can click on this timeline, which also shows you how long your recording is, to quick play something from a specific moment. So if you want to check your sound and so on, it will play back through your chosen device on Audacity. Now, say I want to do more recordings. Say I want to record something from me and then add a song a backing track that I'm singing to. Well, I can go to tracks of here and say add new, mono track, or stereo if the song is in stereo, but generally you can work with mono. And again, some people will be listening on things like speakers, which is something that you have to consider, so stereo doesn't work as well. Stereo also sometimes has problems with panning. If you listen to the old Beatles albums, for example, you'll notice that most of the singing is happening in, I think, the left ear, and the bass and drums is in the right ear. That's because of the way that things were recorded back then. They had to put them on separate tapes, which then got collated into one single tape, but the way to do that was to pan one left and pan one right. So generally, listening to the Beatles with one earbud or one headphone on, not as great of an experience. You miss a lot of Paul McCartney tracks. But anyway, you can add another soundtrack, and you can drop anything here. You can even select some from your main track, copy it, and then you should be able to paste it in your new track. So you can overlap as much as you want. You can even pan one to the left if we want to pull a Beatles, and pan one all the way to the right. This is the control for that. If you double click menus in general in most audio software, it will default to the sort of default position or 0 position. Now, say I recorded this and I feel like it's a bit too quiet, and this is a good take, so we'll get rid of this track. This is a good take, I like it, but I'm a bit quiet. Now, this minus to plus is the gain setting, and as I increase it, I will get louder in the final version of the product. Now, right now I'm at +9, so if we do the math, -12, roughly where I was hitting, +9, I'm getting close to 0, which 0 is microphone or speakers peaking, so audio getting overly loud and it's starting to get distorted. So if I want to go louder, maybe plus 12 is as far as I'll go, and then I'm working in the territory of this is purposefully loud or I am trying to create distorted sound. But for now, I'm going to just default this back to, say, a plus 2.5 because I want myself to be a bit louder. So if we play myself back again, now I'm hitting about minus 18 to minus 12 decibels, which is roughly where I recommend. So I'm now going past 12, it's about 2 higher, like I previously said. When you have multiple tracks, like we did before, you might be interested in editing only one of them. So you realize, oh, when I play back, all the tracks play back at the same time. So I just want to hear the drums, or I just want to hear this person talking in the interview, so I can figure out what volume how their volumes change. You can either press the mute button on the tracks that you want to mute, or if you want to mute everything else but a single track, you press solo, which solos the one track that you select that on. Now, an important thing to consider when you're doing this sort of recording in an audio software is saving. So this is all good, but files don't get saved once you stop the recording. So when we want to save an audio file, the way we do that is we have to export it with all the changes that we put onto it. Now, in this version of Audacity, I won't go into all the effects that we can put on. You can see that up here at the top there is a whole effects bar. We'll talk a bit about them in the other two, just as a concept, because they're easier to visualize and understand. They do work the same here, it's just that the interface is, I would argue, a bit less friendly or a bit harder to grasp because they're very simplistic. But once I've added all my effects onto a track, I need to export it. So the way to do that is usually through the file menu, or there might be a specific button depending on the kind of software you're using. But you find the export button and then you look at the file types. Now, with images, everyone has heard of .jpeg and .png, or maybe getting into more different file types like STL for 3D pictures and so on. Audio also has a couple of different file types. There's MP3, which we've all known and heard about. There's WAV or WAV, OGG, and there's also FLAC, which is not present here. Now, MP3 is the most common. We see it on, back when people used to download their songs, we used to download MP3s to devices, and still with Spotify, it downloads files as MP3s. These are the equivalent of JPEG in the sense that they lose information every time they are compressed or sent, or do not contain all the information that the image or sound was recorded with. So if I go and record this and there's some background noise that is very, very hard to hear, almost imperceptible, and then I save this as an MP3 and I put it into something else and I try and boost the audio, I might not hear that. That might be lost. It won't take the recorded file that I put into it with all of its data. It will only take what the software sees at the time of saving. Now, WAV is a lossless format, as it's called, so this can be just like a vector image, modified endlessly as long as it's saved properly and contains all of its information. OGG files are something that I personally haven't had as much experience with, and I've never had a reason to look into OGG. I know that it's sometimes used in music production, and if you're trying to save files into third-party programs or integrated in software and stuff like that, I wouldn't consider it necessary for most people to know or a normal function. But let's save this file as a WAV, which have slightly bigger file sizes, but I would recommend people to generally save as WAV, and only if needed convert to MP3 on the final step of whatever they're producing. So it asks you where you want to save it and what name you want to give it, so we're just going to give this one the test recording. And encoding, now most platforms and softwares will ask you for 32-bit, which is how much information there is per bit, or how much sound can be, how sound maps onto the actual data in the computer. I recommend 32-bit just because that's the standard in Spotify and YouTube. Things can be upscaled. They lose a bit of quality, but not super perceptible. But if you can, generally I ask or people to try and save in 32-bit float. And once you click save, yes, as you can see, because I have 2 tracks, the software is telling me that this will be mixed down and exported as a mono file, because I have the mono setting over here up at the top. Now, I'm fine with this just because my second track is empty. In most cases, if you're not aiming to produce in stereo, this is also fine. It is important to know if sometimes for some reason you're thinking about having a panned effect. For example, you're doing any form of creative work, or want on a speaker system one source of sound to come from one speaker and one source of sound to come from the other. If you do export as a mono, that's going to be lost in, so all the panning work that we did is going to be lost in exporting as a mono file. But I'm fine with this, so I'm going to say okay. You can disable this to be shown again if you so desire. And metadata. Now, metadata sounded scary to me when I first started looking at saving audio files, but this is just all the other information that gets tagged onto the audio file itself. So things like, for music tracks, it's artist name, track title, album title. It's all the other information when you see it in a file explorer that shows up next to the name. It helps with cataloging, so if you're doing multiple takes of a show or multiple takes for some form of interview or questions or whatever you might need, it's useful to maybe put track titles down, or the year if you're doing a yearly thing and you're saving an archive. You can also do comments on files if you want. This could be less for the next person that's working on it, so you can write something like if you're putting out a stereo file, for example, it could be like 30% panning left and right, just so that they know when they pick it up, or if they're trying to imitate something that you did on the file, the kind of settings that you used. Or, for example, I output it at roughly 12 dB, just so that they don't need to go back in and check it for you. Again, you can disable this whole menu if you want. You can add templates, you can add genres. It's quite an interesting menu that I think adding metadata to files is useful when working with multiple people, just because it saves a lot of the conversation. But most uses that we have for sending files around and uploading them and people listening do not make use of any metadata function, which is sad, but it's also very practical. So I'm not going to add anything, and I'm just going to click OK. Now my file is saved, and if I find it and show it to you, it will be in a folder in my PC. Now, this is, again, the very bare bones of how to use Audacity and how to get started to make a recording instead of just recording it on your Notes app or on your phone. This also helps the quality. And again, if, for example, I'm going to try and record a sample audio where you'll see that my microphone is either too quiet or it will be too loud. Now, I'm going to mute myself while I do this just because I don't want you guys to hear that sound. It's very, very loud. Or it's going to be, well, the quiet one we can do just because you're not going to be able to hear that, but I don't want to subject you to peaked audio. So I'm going to reduce the gain on my microphone, which my interface has a sort of slider or knob that I can turn down, and now you can't hear me anymore. So if I hit record and I'm talking and I can't hear anything. So during that, I was trying to talk and say I was sort of doing a test run for my interview or whatever I was doing, my talk show, and I see this. And I'm like, oh, wait, my microphone gain is not enough. Or, oh, wait, I didn't have the right microphone plugged in. Or this allows you to very visually see any problems you might have with the recording on the go. Now, yes, you can't hear and it might not sound the best or it might be a bit echoey or so on, but this gives that very fast advantage. And just as an example, again, I'm going to now mute myself and show you what a very peaked recording sounds like. This is how peaked recordings look like. This is not great. You don't want your audio file to sound like this. Now, you might notice that it goes very big and it touches the tops and bottoms. Now, every moment when you see these files touching the top and bottom, that's when a microphone is peaked, the audio is clipping, and is being heavily compressed so that it stays within the data format and the file. I'm not going to play this back, but these are two examples of things that you might see when you're trying to do your own recording and look at them and say, oh, wait, I need to change something. Yeah, I think this is pretty much the quick rundown for Audacity. And briefly before the break, I will show you what Reaper Media looks like, just as a comparison. And then post-break, we'll do any exercises and effects and questions with you all. Also, if you have any questions that you don't want to hang on to and you think you might forget them, put them in the chat now and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Now, Zoom is being very friendly as always. There we go. So this is still Audacity, and this is Reaper Media once you have bought a license. It might look a bit more frightening or a lot more empty at first, but there isn't as much of a difference. In this blank space, you can insert tracks, just like we have tracks in Audacity. And the record button is either this red one, or if you want to record to a specific track, it's this one. So before recording, I should mention, generally, apps also have monitoring, which means you can hear yourself back. The problem with this feature is delay. So because information needs to travel through my microphone into my computer, processed, and then back through all the cables into my headphones, that has a bit of a delay. And what that means is that when we're trying to speak while hearing ourselves back with the 2-second delay, that's actually quite long, maybe like a 300 millisecond delay, that becomes problematic because you will start to either slur words or simply not be coherent enough. I can tell you this from multiple takes and tries of trying to talk back to myself, and it's impossible or a very hard skill to develop. But if you disable that or mute the track when you arm it for recording, you can already see in Reaper your volumes. So right now Reaper's telling me that I'm again around -18, -19, a bit above. And before I do any recording onto the track, I can already see that. And then when I press record into my big file, it's starting to show me the same waveform as it did in Audacity and work and so on. Again, you can add more tracks. You can color code them. So there's an option for track color icon. If you right click, go down to, there's multiple options for track manager, but you can set it to a custom color of your choice. We'll pick green for this one. And it will now be in green. Maybe I want this one to be, sure, let's do this orange brown. And this, for example, helps if you are doing multiple sources, you're editing something sent from a lot of people and you have different groups, so you have different segments that you want, and you drop a clip in here and it also gets color coded. So you might be able to see how long specific clips last and group them up, multiple tracks of the same color, which mean, I don't know, lines from the same team of people or anything of the sort. You can also, down here, have master controls of every track. So right now, track 1 is muted, just so I didn't hear myself. I can reduce the gain on it. So as I reduce it, you can see my levels are, they're not going down. You can't hear me anyway, but my track is muted. However, if I reduce the gain here to -12 and I try and play this back, to show me the same, I'm very quiet. If I increase the volume to +5, for example, and mute this other one, it's starting to show me the same waveform as I am louder. Now, the reason why this is, again, helpful, and you can reset them by double-clicking, is say you have, there's an option to insert multiple tracks, by the way. If you right-click and click Insert Multiple Tracks, say you have 7 of them. And when you listen to your whole piece, you realize that one of the tracks that's color-coded a certain way or is named a certain way, you can name them such as Performer 1. Performer 1 is a bit quiet. So while listening to it, I can, on the move, sort of increase their volume or decrease their volume and adjust that to my preference. This slider on the left is the master slider, so this is the whole production. If I find that the whole thing needs to be a bit more quiet for the final product, or yes, this is great, but I listen to it and I'm already at 75% volume on my headphones or my computer sound, and it could be a bit louder, I can crank that up ever so slightly. Now, the main difference that I would say is between Reaper and Audacity is that Reaper has a lot more effects and plugins, which again we'll get to after the break, and the option to visualize multiple tracks and have their masters, so I can choose which ones to record to, choose which ones to mute, and play with their volumes at the same time. Visualize and color code them is very helpful when you're working with large amounts of sources or editing a lot of files at the same time. For your day-to-day, for your every once in a while recordings that you might have to do, I personally think Audacity, which is a free software, again, it's amazing. It will do what you want it to do, which is be a bit more professional, be able to hear back your audio, make sure you're not clipping or too quiet, and then save them, add tags if you want to. That's as far as I think most users come to. And then if you are looking to understand editing a bit more and have more of a workflow, maybe Reaper is the place to go. But with that said, we'll take a quick 5-minute break here, just because I know that we've been at it for like 25 minutes or so, maybe even 30. Wow. Yeah, we'll see you at 22, where I'll talk about effects, and we can you can send any questions you have during the break or after the break, and I can display any specific functions you want. But see you after the break. Hello everyone again. I'm back from my very quick refill on the water and ready to kick it back up whenever in the next sort of minute or two. I see there's no questions in the chat yet, which is totally fine. I understand that it might be a bit confusing or daunting at first to have to open another piece of software to do something that you could easily do on your phone sometimes, but I think Meza said the other week as well that one of the main difference between amateur productions and professional productions is, one of the big ones is the quality of the sound, and the way that we record them is, well, I would argue just as important as the editing itself. So when possible, that tiny bit of effort goes a long way, just to make sure that everything is roughly at the same sort of gain level and sounds normalized and compressed. But we'll look at that just now. So we'll wait like a minute or two more and then show you what Adobe Audition sounds like and what all the effects look like. Alright, well, I think I'll get going with Audition if there's no other questions. So, as you might remember from last week and me rambling on, Audition is probably... Alright. Yep, I noticed as I was just about to start talking. Thank you, Barnaby. So, as you might remember from last week and me rambling on previously, Audition is, unfortunately or fortunately, one of the preferred pieces of software when it comes to editing a lot of voice work, because it has a very smooth workflow. It integrates well with video editors and any other type of media tool that you might think of or have ever considered using. The main problem is the reoccurring monthly payments, which subscription systems seem appealing because you think, well, I'll only use this for one project, I'll pay a month. And if that is the case, then yeah, it is a lot cheaper than using other, even Reaper, which is a one-time purchase, is £60. But if you end up using it more than that number of times and you start going into a 6-month use period, it's already raking in the cash. But that being said, let's look at Adobe Audition. So when you start Audition, you're greeted with something quite different because it is an editor. So you can do the same thing you do in Audacity, which is record a track. So if I press that red button, things will start recording. However, you might notice that there is no button to select my inputs. That's because, unfortunately, Adobe Audition syncs those options deep into some menus down in Edit, Preferences, and Audio Hardware. Now here, I can make the same choices as before of choosing my microphone instead of my laptop microphone. It does tell me that this might change some of the channel mappings or input assignments and affect playback, but I I think this is a known sort of fact. I still don't disable this just because it's important to get reminded every time. So we'll keep my handy dandy microphone. And you have an option here to select latency. Now this is a pretty big feature for Audacity again, for that Audacity and Reaper Media sort of lack in the amount that you can change these. You can go between 30 and 500. 30 latency is probably as low as we can get, or these systems can get. 200 is generally the normal latency expected when the signal chain needs to travel both ways. Now, we're not going to be doing much sort of playback. If you are, you might look into getting very low latency systems or instruments or interfaces, mixers, and so on. But 200 is fine. So anyway, we want to record something with Adobe Audition. So the red button will prompt me with, well, you want to save a file. What name should it have? I'm going to call it test recording. What sample rate, which is what kind of frequency range it should sit in, and 4800 or 44100 is, sorry, 44,000 and 44100 is usually where the range is, and you can see it defaults to 32 float. However, in stereo, I'm going to leave these settings on just because these are the settings I usually work with. Again, if you want, you can go down to 44,100 if that's, for some reason, one of the platforms you're uploading in might request that sample rate. So if we click OK, I am now recording in stereo, but you might notice that both waveforms are the same, which means that the signal from my microphone is actually mono, but it is recording in both left and right, so then I can later on transform one of them or both of them. Again, you can see where my levels are, and they are showing with green, and then they move into yellow, which is, yellow is where you want to be roughly, and then red is the no zone, the clipping, we're doing bad things. Now I'm going to stop my recording, and now once this is finalized, you can actually hear playback as I scrub through it. Both waveforms, which is funny, but you can also, the signal from my microphone is actually mono. Play it back. You can zoom in. You can, using various tools, select a part of the sound and increase by, say, 5, just this one piece, and you can see how it goes higher, and so on. Now, one of the huge features of Adobe Audition and why a lot of people like it is this button right here. Show frequency, spectral frequency display. Now what this does is it shows you a heat map of where the sound is onto the frequency. So the lower it is, the more bass, so frequencies below 1K, and the higher it goes up to 10K and so on. And you see the hotter the color is, the more intense the sound is around those frequencies. And there's this button right here, which is called the Spot Healing Brush Tool, which allows you to reduce some noises. For example, right here we have this very high noise in the higher frequencies. Let's listen to it. Again, you can see that's my S. That's the sibilance, as it's called. S's have a very strong way of coming across microphones depending on the kind of microphone it is and what kind of filters you have on it and so on. Now with the Spot Brush Tool, I can actually zoom in if I just scroll with my mouse and drag onto it. And it, as you can see, it erased some, not all, but it tried to normalize within the sort of pattern that amount of sibilance or sort of harshness on that spot of sound. Again, you can see where now the S disappeared because I put a lot, it took sort of a chunk out, but with things like background noise or microphone thuds or other such effects, this is a super useful tool. And Adobe Audition actually has a multi-track editor as well, which, as you see, prompts me with what I'd like to name my session, where I'd like to save it, and the same sort of sample rate settings. Yes, I just overwrote one of my previous sessions, and it shows up with the same sort of menu that with tracks that we've seen before. Audition also allows me, just like Reaper, but in a more sort of smooth way, to select my inputs, be it mono or go straight into the audio hardware, which is where you select what kind of sounds you want. You can arm a track for recording, where it again shows you your levels. You can mute, solo, and all the good stuff. Now, unless someone has any questions, which you can feel free to drop in the chat, I'll just quickly hop in to showing you what the effects are and how to use them. We'll take this clip that I just recorded, and I can right-click it and insert it into multi-track, which will transfer it to here, or I could have recorded it straight into here. There isn't any difference between those. Now, with my clip selected in this default sort of setup down here on the left, well, I can of course change its decibel output. So say I want it plus 10, I want it to be very loud. You can see it jumped up. If I put it to plus 25, well, I can start seeing it clipping and sort of get cut off at the high points. And as a result, I don't want to do that and put it back down to, say, a plus 10. Now I can loop it, I can mute it, I can stretch it, make it slower or quicker if I want to, but the effects rack. Now I can choose whether to put an effect on this clip in particular, so just this one, or the whole track. So if I duplicate this clip, I could apply just one effect and it will affect anything else I will record or move onto this track. Or perhaps I want just these two and I go individually and select their effects. But once you click on this, you have multiple slots, and with this play button, you have your whole list. Now, let's talk about compression, just because I've bumped on it a lot in the past while. And it is within the dynamics setting. You will find this in both Audacity and Reaper, and it's called a compressor. Now what this does is it takes any frequency above my threshold and it tries to normalize it. So make all the quieter stuff below that frequency louder, and all the frequencies or all the sound above that level quieter. And I can ask it to do it by a certain amount of ratio. So how hard to compress. I will actually select a minus 15, say, and compress it a lot. And what we might see is that when I go back in, the peaks aren't as high anymore. So this is just going to keep getting squished the harder I compress it, up to a point where maybe I'll just have one constant block of sound at the same level, although in the original recording I might have not had that. Now outside of compression, you have delay and echo, which works as you would expect it. Once you click one of them, it asks you what the delay time you want it to be in both left and the right channel. You have presets, which again, one of the main reasons why Adobe Audition is so loved is the amount of presets that you can choose for this. You can turn effects on and off with these power buttons. And one of the main things that people will look at and this is again present in both Adobe Audition, Reaper, and Audacity, is the denoise function. Now, you recorded something with your laptop and it has a lot of noise, which is the one thing that people want to get rid of, or it has a lot of background noise. The denoise function looks at the amount of low bass or sort of upper bass section, and it reduces it. I would recommend not going above 50, like I said in my previous lesson, just because if I say put this up to 70% and then try and listen to my recording without the delay, you might notice that both waveforms are the same, which means that the signal from my microphone is actually mono, but it is recording in both left and right. In this initial part where I have a lot of bass in stereo, but you might notice that you can hear that my bass has basically disappeared and is crunched up a bit. And I generally think that going above 50, now I didn't have a lot of background noise, so you can't really hear as much of the effect, but above 50 is a place where, unless you know or specifically design a track or a sound to be made with this effect, I wouldn't recommend it. You can also do other functions such as modulation, reverb. For guitar suites, there's a lot of amp modelers that you can try and imitate various sounds. But the one last thing we'll look at right before the end is the Parametric Equalizer, which sounds very threatening. But what it is, like I talked before, is just a diagram of what the frequencies look like. So if I play this in live, you will see how my frequencies look like on this display. In stereo, but you might notice that both waveforms are... So what I can do is, for example, cut off all my low bass. So this will drag all the frequencies down here a lot lower, so now I have absolutely no bass. Same, which means that the signal from my microphone is actually... I have no bass now. I could also cut off all my high end mono, but it is recording in both left and right, so then I now sound a bit more on the phone. If we keep only the high notes and drop the midsection, which is what our ears are sort of mostly used to, later on transform one of them, I'll sound very nasally, both of them. Again, you can see where my levels are, and they are showing with green, and then I sound very nasally right now. But the purpose of this is you can play with it very, very gently to see what works for your voice, what works for the type of sample that you're trying to use, and overall, you can reduce some of the noise from this menu. So if you figure out that, oh, I have a lot of background noise around this frequency, you can come in here and just drop those or move these around and figure out if you see the peak, for example, I want to try and specifically remove that peak, I'll push it down. But you also have various presets for things like guitars, drums. If I want to sound like an all-time radio, transform one of them. I now sound like an all-time radio. Yeah, that's as much as the sort of in-depth effects. Now, I'll stop sharing my screen, and just because we just hit the 1 hour mark, I'll ask if people have any questions or would like any specific sort of functions displayed, or if you'd be interested in how to do a specific thing for one of the current projects you have in mind, feel free to let me know. This would be the time for that. If not, I think this has been my sort of audio side of the software principles and understanding how to use the bare bones pieces of software or the functions. Unfortunately, again, Mezeb wasn't able to display the video side, and we hope that with the speedy recovery he'll be able to get it done for next week. If not, there will be a recorded version that we'll put up online. Yes. So yes, this has been it. Thank you thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, I'll be around for another 10, 15 minutes if need be. If not, have a nice rest of the Wednesday, everybody.